and welcome to the show, James. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I was trying to think of how we all met. I obviously met you through Rory, and did you meet Rory through Christian?
Yes, I met Rory through my tennis instructor, and I guess it was through Nate Roos, who,
Yes.
yeah, it was through Nate. He had been working with Rory and then recommended him. And then I started doing some sessions with Rory, and he instantly became one of my favorite people.
And then I love your girlfriend Alexis. She's amazing, and she saved the day for me one time taking care of Jax so I could go to this class that I really wanted to go to. She's a sweetheart. So anyway, we're grateful to
Oh yeah,
call you.
she loved it. It was a great pleasure for her to watch Jax. She just loved it.
Oh, I loved it. It was like such a huge help to me. But we're grateful to call you guys friends of ours. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's the same. It's awesome. You guys rule.
So you're supposed to be on tour right now. How's quarantine life gone for you over there?
It's fine. I like to point out whenever I talk about this before I complain about quarantine. We feel so lucky that we have everything we need here, and financially, it's not imperative for me to be out there working every day. But so many people are going through so many difficult hardships. This is going to be a really painful time for a lot of people.
Yes.
So we feel very blessed throughout that. But yeah, we had a complete year of touring planned, and that's all gone now. We almost made it through our South American tour. This all kind of went down while we were in South America. We were in Argentina,
Mm.
and we actually had all of our equipment set up on stage in Buenos Aires when the government shut down all the concerts.
Oh, wow.
But we only had two more shows. We had Buenos Aires and we had Bogota. We had already made it through Brazil, Mexico. So we just came home, and then the quarantine started and we jumped straight into it. It's
Wow.
been a very, for everyone, it's been a unique experience. But to go from one night playing in front of, 30,000 people to the next day just back home and looking at the rest of the year being like, oh, we're not doing any more of these shows. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. So wait, is the rest of the tour on hold or just completely canceled, or how are you guys taking it day by day, or how do they handle that?
We're taking it day by day. I think officially the first half of the tour has been canceled, and they're going to reschedule the dates. The dates that we have in the fall, I don't think have officially been canceled yet, but it seems like that's what's going to happen. And I think all those will be rescheduled for whenever those will be rescheduled. I mean, I don't personally see any of this happening until fall of 2021.
I know,
I
I
would
can't
love
imagine.
I'd love to be wrong about that, but I just
Yeah,
don't think people are going to be eager to go out to be in a crowd of 20,000 people.
exactly. So yeah, what a crazy shift for you. You're here, you're on tour, you're performing for 30,000 people, and now you're isolated in your home with, is it just you and Alexis?
It's just me and Alexis, and we just moved into a new house.
Ah, which is
So,
beautiful, by the way.
oh, thank you. Yeah, we were lucky in that regard because we moved out of what had sort of been my bachelor pad for the last 15 years, which was a smaller place, and moved into this new place together. So we feel really lucky that that all went down before all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have this amazing studio. Rory said you're working on some music. Are you guys working on a new album, did he say?
Yeah, we're working on a new album right now. And it's great that in 2020 we have the technology that allows us to do that. We don't have to be together in the same room. We can leave Dropbox files for each other, take the tracks, put them into our own systems, and do overdubs. And that's what I've been doing here, which has been great. And that's how we were working before the quarantine anyway. We trade files, do overdubs, send them back and forth to each other because we all have enough of the recording equipment in our own homes. And that's pretty much how I think a lot of artists are operating today. Back in the day, we'd all have to be together in the same studio, recording together at the same time, and now it's much more fragmented. And there's good and bad aspects to that type of process. It
Totally.
was fun. It was fun to be all together in the same room, and we would just camp out in a studio for 6 months and then come out at the end of it with a record. And now it's more like, oh, we're working on this song this week and sort of trading it back and forth. And it allows us to keep on recording even while we're touring or while Adam was working on the TV show. We're always working on new songs, which is great.
I was thinking when I was doing all this research for our interview, I was thinking, I mean, it is so incredible that you guys have been together for so long. I mean, you so often hear about these bands that are successful and then break up. There's personality issues. There's all these, whatever the reason may be, they don't stay together. Maybe working in your own homes is part of the reason that you're able to stay together for so long.
Yeah, well, I think we have been together for a long time, and we have been very good over the years at managing our relationships with each other.
What is the reason that you think that you've been able to stay together? I was kind of kidding about the other thing, but
Oh yeah, well,
yeah.
that is true. I think if we continued to make records the way that we used to, also we were younger back then. We had less stuff going on. Everyone has their own family lives now, and so we can't just be camped out in the studio 24/7, just yelling at each other anymore. We just don't have time for that. So I mean, you're absolutely right. This new sort of recording process does help with that. It sounds so cheesy, but communication has been really important for keeping the relationship between us over all these years solid. So many bands break up after a few years because there's always issues of money, over creative control, over who's in the spotlight, and all these things tear bands apart. And we've always been able to talk out issues when they come up rather than sort of let them fester. I
That's
think
huge.
the way a lot of bands do. And also, I think a lot of bands break up because there's different people within the band vying for the spotlight. And we've always known the dynamic of the band is Adam's in the front and the rest of us are there to support the lead singer. And if you look at bands that have had, famous tension in rock history, like the Eagles, there were multiple people that wanted to be in the front.
Right.
And with our band, we're all like, no, Adam is the front guy. We're
Oh
all
yeah.
happy with him taking all of the limelight. That is fine with all of us because that's just our personalities. And that's benefited the band because I think a lot of bands break up when there's that sort of tension.
Yeah, that's huge. So you grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. How early did you realize? Were you like just started playing guitar? Like what was the trajectory of starting to play the guitar? I assume that was how you started. I don't know. The two being like, this is what I want to do for a living.
Well, I started playing guitar relatively late. I was 13. I had started piano lessons when I was 8, and I played in the school band on percussion. I wanted to be a drummer originally, but my best friend and next door neighbor, his mom bought him a drum set before my parents would buy me one. So he became the drummer in our band that we had formed before we even had instruments.
That's the cutest.
So yeah, we were into music and we knew we wanted to play. My older brother, he had a garage band that we used to go watch play and watch
Ah,
them rehearse. So that was a big influence. And he would play me music, and just from a very early age, I just loved music. He played me the band Rush, which I really
mm-hmm.
loved, and he played me some of the guitarists that I still really love, like Joe Satriani. This was the late '80s, so I just loved the sound of those recordings and was just really excited by it. And then seeing my brother do it, I was like, oh, we could do that too. It took years for me to get my parents to actually get me a guitar. I got one for my 13th birthday,
Okay.
and they got me an 8-week crash course at the mall. So, it wasn't even, I didn't even get the guitar. It was an 8-week rental with group guitar lessons at the mall.
We'll see
And
how it goes, kind of thing.
exactly. And I got into it and right away was just hooked and was practicing all the time. And I started to figure out songs by ear. And so then they put me into private lessons, and I just kept going with it. From very early on, I knew it was all I wanted to do, but I also was pretty practical about the fact that it was hard to make a living as a musician.
Yeah.
So I was still, doing my schoolwork and trying to get good grades. And, I went to the University of Nebraska. I majored in advertising because I thought, well, that could be a sensible career. I'll play my music on the side. But in my life, music was always taking over. It was always much louder in my life than anything else.
Mm.
And then I had a band in college. Long story short, we ended up moving out to Los Angeles after we won a national Battle of the Bands competition. We won this competition. We won $25,000, and we used it to move out to LA. And that's how I got out here and kind of started my career.
Wow. Before we leave your childhood, I discovered in my research that you were an Eagle Scout.
That is true.
That is impressive. That's not easy to do, right?
Yeah, well, my parents bribed me. They said if I finished my Eagle, that they'd buy me a guitar that I wanted. And I still have that guitar. It's one of my most prized possessions. But yeah, Boy Scouts was great. Earning those merit badges and earning the Eagle, it taught me there's certain things that you don't want to do that take lots of time and are hard to do. But if you can work through that and sort of accomplish those goals as a kid, I think you really see the value of hard work and perseverance and grit. And it kind of it taught me a lot of that to get through and actually earn the Eagle, because not a lot of the kids who start out in Scouts actually earn the Eagle. But my older brother had earned his, so I knew I had to do it, and I didn't finish it until I was 17. Wow. So I barely
just
barely
made it just under the wire.
But then I got that guitar.
You got it, and you got the guitar. Oh my gosh, that is incredible. And what an amazing lesson of that hard work and determination, which of course, as a parent now, like, what a valuable thing for your child to learn, and something that I hope we can teach Jax for sure. Okay, so switching gears a little bit. So obviously you're the lead guitarist for Maroon 5, one of the most successful bands of our time. I mean, crazy success. And you are one of the most humble, down-to-earth people that I know. How do you stay so grounded? Like, where does that come from?
Oh, well, thanks. I can say that it's easy to be humble in this band just because of the dynamic. I'll say, like, it's a unique experience that for the rest of us in the band, besides Adam, we get to live pretty ordinary lives.
Yeah.
We can kind of go under the radar. For Adam, it's really hard to even walk outside without being hounded by people who want selfies. So sort of having the proximity to that kind of fame, but to be able to live a normal life has been just a really great blessing, because I think a lot of people growing up would really be attracted to that level of notoriety, but then you see it up close and you see the true sort of cost of that. Sure. So I think we all feel very blessed that we get to live on a day-to-day basis pretty ordinary lives. Not a lot of people are in that position because the band has done extremely well over the years, but I could still, go down to the mall, and maybe every once in a while somebody would be like, "Oh, hey, aren't you the guy from the..." But for the most part, I can go about my daily business, which is great.
Which you love.
Yeah,
and that was never kind of why you got into this in the first place. Like, you weren't looking for the fame. You were really just this musician and loved the craft and the art.
Well, yeah, I think that if I had a different day job, had I gone into advertising, for example, which had been my plan, I would be playing just as much music. That's just always what I love to do. And that's, when I was younger, that's how I saw my life panning out. I thought, oh, I'll probably have a day job, but I'll be able to play gigs at night. And that was something that I was going to do. I just happened to work it out so that this is my day job, which is extremely lucky. And that was really, when I was starting out, that was my only goal. was to make this make a living from playing music, and so everything else that's happened to me is really just a bonus.
That's awesome. I read or listened or heard somewhere that you first saw Maroon 5 play before they were Maroon 5. They were Kara's Flowers at that time, and you saw them play and you had a premonition that you were going to be part of the band. I love premonitions. I love intuitions. So first of all, is that accurate? Can you tell us a little bit about that? And what do you think a premonition is? Like, where do you think that comes from?
Well, Malcolm Gladwell wrote that book Blink
Mm-hmm.
that's really interesting. That's about kind of those premonitions, and I think that could explain to a certain degree what I felt that evening, because I saw this band play. I was in LA. I was playing in another band that I had moved out from Nebraska with, that were some of my best friends that I had grown up with. But that band was we had some issues. I wasn't getting along with the lead singer, and we had been we'd been auditioning for record companies. Nothing had really been happening, and we were really feeling the strain within the band. And so I go out and I see this band play, and Adam starts singing, and I instantly am like, wow, he's really good. And I saw that Jesse was playing keyboards and then switching to guitar. And sonically, I could hear guitar parts that I would play if I were up on stage with them, and there was space for it. A lot of times you see a band and it's like they're fully formed. I was like, oh no, there's a place for me within this band.
Mm.
And so I think that premonition that I had was kind of a quick calculation of, oh, they need another guitar player. Stylistically, I hear exactly what they need. And plus, these guys are going places because the quality of the songs and the quality of Adam's voice, they were the best band that I had heard since I'd moved out to LA. So I think all of that came together right away as this premonition of, oh, I'm going to be in that band.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a unique experience. It was at a venue called the Glass House in Pomona, California. And I went with my friend who was the lead singer of the band Real Big Fish. Do you remember that band?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was a big fan of theirs, and so he took me to that first show. And then eventually, everything that I sort of predicted that night came to be, because eventually they heard me play, and then they asked me to start coming to jam with them. And then over the period of a few months, I sort of ended up joining the band.
Do you think the premonition like led you to take action to go down that path, or do you think the premonition was this thing revealing the future that was already laid out?
That's a good question. It goes to that larger philosophical question as on free will and whether
Mm-hmm.
we really are in charge of any of the decisions we make,
Yes.
which is an interesting topic. But um, I could see a certain path laid out in front of me, but I still had to walk through the door. So there was still, I could have gone that night and seen that and then not taken any other action on it.
Yeah.
But that didn't seem like a real choice even. I was pulled by gravity towards that situation, but it did take some action on my part, and some really difficult decisions, because ultimately I had to quit the band that I was performing in. And that was still to this day one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life, because we had moved out from Nebraska together, but it was clear that it wasn't the best option for me. We just were not getting along. Me and the lead singer were really butting heads. So, and that was difficult, but I did have to walk through that door. So it's a combination that I had to act on those sort of instincts to actually follow through and do it.
Yeah, I imagine that must have been like a breakup, like a really difficult breakup, because you have such a bond and connection and you share so much with these people. You moved out to California with them, and then to just say, I found something else, or I'm moving on to something else. That's got to be a tough one.
Yeah, it was. It was exactly like a breakup, because we were living together too. So
Oh
one of
God.
my new bandmates drove a U-Haul to my old bandmate's house and moved me out with the other guys sitting on the porch. It was rough.
It sounds rough. Okay, so then you're in Maroon 5 and you guys, how did this success come? Was there like this pivotal turning point where you blew up? Was it a gradual rise to the success where you're at now? What happened?
It was a very gradual rise. We were signed initially to an independent record label. We didn't have the muscle of a giant record company in the beginning, but we had a small company that really believed in us, and they gave us a tiny amount of money to go out on the road to build our reputation as live performers, and that was their plan. So after we had made our first record, we were out on the road for 2.5 years before our first single finally was added on the radio. And then after that first single was added on the radio, it took months for that to turn into an actual top 10 hit. And that was really fueled by the fact that we were just crisscrossing around the country, going to radio station after radio station, performing for them and performing at their events. But it was a rough couple of years because we were doing this in a van, which I was driving. We didn't have a tour bus, or we only had one crew guy to help us out. So we were, after shows, we were loading everything out, setting everything up. That was a difficult period. And right at about the point where I think we might have burned out, then the Harder to Breathe, our first single, started to do really well. And then we released our second single, This Love, and then that started to explode. And then we got on some more tours, and it kept going, and then it sort of snowballed from there. But it took a long time, and so it took a lot of patience from us and our record label, who was out there supporting us. It was 4.5 years that we toured just the first record.
Wow.
Long process.
You're like one of very few people who gets to work as a musician and to be at this level of success. I mean, it's got to feel like it's like a dream come true. Do you ever feel like, are you constantly able to be grateful for it, or do you have to kind of like pinch yourself, or do you, because I think when we get into these phases in our life where something normalizes, we sometimes can just get used to it, and it becomes this, oh, like this is like where I'm at. And for me, I'm always trying to find ways to remind myself of like all the abundance that I have right where I am, because even though I'm used to it, it's still like, gosh, I'm so lucky. Like, this is not how everybody's living, and this is not, everybody doesn't get to do what they love, and everybody doesn't get to even like have food and shelter and like the basics. So what has your experience been with being grateful and remembering where you are and kind of what you're able to do every day?
Yeah, I'm very, very grateful that we've been able to do everything that we have, and it is true, at different points you can get complacent, and these things do get normalized. There's this feeling that like, well, if we accomplish this, if we sell this many records, then we're going to be happy, we're going to be satisfied with our lives, and it's going to be great. And you reach those different milestones and you realize, oh no, I'm still me, and it's still the same sort of existence. And so how do I maximize my happiness at all these different sort of levels? Because you realize that any of these achievements, they're not going to bring you the happiness or satisfaction that you think that they would. In fact, they might leave you wanting even more, because you want another hit of dopamine that comes from that sort of accomplishment, and you see people sort of spinning out in their lives just chasing that sort of rush from success. So yeah, gratitude is so important, and I have to check myself all the time to remind myself to be grateful for everything that we have done, and everything that I do have, and all the sort of blessings that I do have in my life. And that's a constant process, like that you have to continually check in with.
Yes, every day. And you are a meditator. Can you tell me a little bit about your meditation process, and how did that begin for you?
Yeah, I got into meditation probably about 15 years ago, initially from going and doing yoga. And my favorite part of yoga was always the end, when you're in Shavasana and then they sort of lead you on a guided
Oh,
meditation.
I love that part.
And I was like, I really like that part of it. I don't really practice yoga much anymore. I should, I need to, but I really got into the meditative aspect of it. And then I saw a flyer for a meditation class, and I went, and I was instantly into it because I think sitting down initially to meditate the first few times, I didn't really understand how chaotic my consciousness really was, how many thoughts were constantly careening, and how I was just really kind of being tossed about by all these different thoughts and sensations without really being aware of it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to see the benefits from meditating pretty early on. And early on, someone explained it to me as if you're standing on the side of a road and cars are going by, and those cars are your thoughts. And usually, without mindfulness, we're getting in the cars and going for a ride.
Yes.
And so when you meditate, you practice just sitting at the side of the road and waving at the cars and watching them pass. And
I love
sometimes
that.
you end up in a car and you end up on a ride, and then you ask the driver to gently to pull over because that's not what you're doing right now. And that was so helpful for me. And that to me is what meditation is in a tiny nutshell. But it's a lifelong process to learn how to get out of the cars and not to be caught up by the cars.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and so I'm still doing that to this day, and I love it, and it's a big part of my life.
Oh, I love that imagery. I'm gonna use it.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think that's the best explanation that I've heard, but I'm sure there's other ways to describe it too.
I
And of
love
course,
the go. What?
oh no, you can't really. There's so much of this the process you try to put into words too, and you can't really explain. Meditation is one of those things that you could write books about it, but unless you sit your ass down on the cushion and practice for yourself, you're not going to really understand what
Yes.
anyone's talking about.
Yes. I feel like Eckhart Tolle talks about um he's like you can with presence he talks about if you write this thesis on honey you can describe it so well and you can go in depth about how amazing and what it tastes like and what it feels like but if you've never tasted it you're missing the whole experience, so it really is something that you have to embody in order to
Exactly.
understand it. So performing and like using mindfulness and meditation in your line of work, how does it contribute to what you do?
That was another reason that I wanted to get into meditation. As a performer, how do you deal with performance anxiety with butterflies? Because
Yeah.
we were performing on these huge stages on live TV in front of millions of people, and I could get through the performances, but I was miserable because
Really?
because I was so nervous because of the just the level of anxiety. Like I'm live, on Saturday Night Live. If I screw up, this mistake will live on forever,
Yeah.
and I'll let down my bandmates. I'll let down, my friends back in Nebraska who are watching.
Sure.
So I was getting through these performances just like
Like, oh.
so tense and so anxious, and we get through, and I never, up until this point, I've never had one of these giant screw ups that like I've imagined, but I get through the performances, but at the end of it, I was saying like that wasn't any fun. I was miserable the whole time, just and
Don't
leading
mess
up
up.
to
Don't
it
mess up.
too. Don't mess, yeah, and just the anxiety of like sleepless nights before some of those big performances too,
Yeah.
thinking like, okay, what if something goes wrong? So meditation really helped me get a handle of that whole process because what it allowed me to do was to take that anxiety or those butterflies, however you want to describe it, and to break it down into parts. Because what you learn from meditating is that every sensory experience that you have is just that. It's just sensory experience. And I think when there's a lot of it happening at the same time, they compound and become worse than they are as individual components. So
Mm.
like, for example, anxiety, you could break it down as like an actual physical emotional sensation in your body, that would feel for me kind of like heat in my chest or stomach that's kind of vibrating.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you combine that with thoughts that are racing out of control, negative thoughts, those together are multiplied into a horrible experience. But if you break it down into the physical sensation itself, it was like, oh, that's just this wave of energy that's pulsating through my chest. And oh yeah, those thoughts that are coming, those never really go away. They keep on coming. If you can break those down, it becomes a much more bearable experience.
Sure. Sure.
And and so that really helped me, because I think the feeling of just being overwhelmed would be not being aware of those individual parts.
Yeah.
And being overwhelmed is being carried away by all that stuff happening. So mindfulness allows you to go in and to really understand what's happening in your body and realize that it's all just sensory information. It's all just energy flowing through you. And that
Yeah.
sounds a little woo woo, but I think for most people, if they sat down and tried some of these practices, they'd be pretty easily able to experience those sensations as just sensations.
So what was your experience when would you meditate right before the performance? Was it something that took like meditating for a certain amount of time and it just kind of helped you in these performances? Do you still experience this now, the anxiety?
Sure, yeah, you still experience it, but I wouldn't say that I'm ever overwhelmed by it
Got it.
anymore. And
Cool.
so I think that's why a daily practice can be really important, because what you're doing when you sit down in some sort of formal daily practice is you're practicing for your life when those things come in. And a lot of meditators, they constantly talk about, oh, taking the practice from the cushion into your life.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you want to do. It becomes something when you practice every morning. That's why it's great to practice in the morning. You set up your day to be mindful throughout the day when all those things come at you. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, you're practicing in the moment, but a lot of times in those really tense situations, there's going to be a lot going on. So you might not be able to, okay, now I'm meditating on stage.
No, not on
But
stage, but like before the performance, not like
but
during,
before, yeah,
right
before
before
the
the
performance.
performance.
But if you've done
Like
some
you just like
meditation
stop
that day,
playing.
yeah, stop.
Excuse me, everybody. I'm not going to mess up on the guitar, but I'm just going to take
Yeah.
a moment to meditate. I mean, I
Oh,
know
but
you can meditate while you're moving, and you could technically. I'm sure music is a meditation to you, so I'm sure that that's
yeah,
possible in some way.
but what you've done during your daily practice is you've strengthened your concentration, your clarity, and your equanimity so that you can carry those into the performance.
Yes.
And sometimes while I am on stage, I actually am kind of in more of a formal meditative sort of state, because
Yeah.
I'll I'll I'll, I'll choose as my object of meditation while I'm on stage. If I'm not focused, I'll say, okay, I'm going to focus in on Adam's voice and really listen and let that sort of guide my performance. Or I'm going to focus just on hearing the hi-hat of the drummer, and that will
Ah,
lock me really into the groove. The ability to do that is really strengthened by the meditation practice, because every time you sit down and just focus on your breath, you're flexing that muscle of concentration, and you're also flexing the muscle of clarity, which knowing what's actually going on in your body. And then the equanimity is the biggest piece, which is being okay with whatever comes up.
mm,
And the equanimity really helps you on stage, because if, for example, you hit a wrong note, if you bring equanimity to that, say, okay, another bar is coming up.
yeah.
It's in the past. We can move on.
Yeah.
Then you're going to be in a much better position than if you're like, oh, you screwed up again. And then those negative thoughts start going again.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that idea of like focusing your energy on like one thing and having that help guide you. I think that's really cool. We can all apply that in different ways in our life, I think.
Totally.
Oh, that's cool. You've gone on, I don't know if multiple, but you've definitely gone on a silent meditation retreat, right? Will you
Yeah.
tell me what that is? Tell me what that's all about.
Yeah, it sounds really far out, and I guess in some ways it is, but basically, I went to a retreat center. It was at a Catholic monastery, but it was more of a Buddhist practice that we were doing. And you go and you take a vow of silence. And traditionally, I think the Vipassana retreats, Vipassana is a style of meditation. Um, they're 10 days. The one that I've been on four, and they've been, I think the longest that I did was 8 days. And you take a vow of silence and you basically meditate all day, every day.
That's
so,
amazing.
so they have it set up at the retreat center so that there's bells that ring that tell you when it's time to go down into the Zendo and start meditating. So a schedule would be like the first bell would ring at 5 a.m. and you'd be down in the Zendo by 5:30 a.m. for the morning rounds of meditation. Usually you go for 45 minutes or an hour, and then you have a break where you would do a walking meditation so that you're not just sitting there
Sitting.
for 5 hours, but you continue the meditations even in the breaks and in the walking. And then you have a break for breakfast. And in the breakfast hall, you're there with the other retreatants in silence. And so you eat breakfast in silence, and then you go back to the Zendo and you meditate, and then you have lunch, go back to the Zendo. And then usually in the evening, there's what they call a Dharma talk, where basically like a Buddhist sermon. But the idea being that you're going to be there only focused on going inward. And your whole life is set up while you're there to have no outside distractions that we would usually have in our daily lives. And it's an opportunity to go really deep. And there's just simply, for most of us, in the way our daily lives are set up, there's no way that you're going to go that deep into a meditation practice without having these specific conditions. And it's something that I would recommend to anyone, because there's nowhere to hide anymore from your own brain.
Yeah.
And so you have to go in, and you get such a deeper understanding of how your brain works when you give it that amount of space.
Sure.
And it's very difficult for the first couple days. A lot of stuff comes up. It's hard to describe the experience, but you can come through the other side to experiencing a much more flowing way of relating to the world, I'll say. It sounds really out there, but you start to really get a glimpse of the way things arise and pass in your consciousness that leads to just a much more effortless way of being. And I realize that sounds out there and sort of woo woo.
No, I love it.
But I think that's why retreats are getting more and more popular. I think people are figuring this out, that that's what's needed to go real deep.
The first couple days, I'd imagine there's like just tons of resistance. Like your brain is like, this isn't how we usually do things. Like, what are you doing? And there's resistance and there's a lot of chatter. Is there also like emotional releases and deep healing that needs to happen coming up? I mean, I'm sure it's very different for every person, but
yeah, I think there are a lot of different things that can happen for people. And I think the kind of work that happens in meditation is different from the work that you would do in, say, psychotherapy. But I think the process of going that deep does bring up stuff maybe that you haven't dealt with. And so I've certainly had emotional releases on the way into deeper states of concentration, for sure.
Did each time you go there, was it a similar experience that you had on the other end of it? Like, did you come out of it in similar ways? Did you have different takeaways each time? Did it kind of depend on where you were in your life, or what was it similar that you came out just with this sense of peace?
Yeah, I think each time you come out with a sense of peace, and you come, for me, I just came out with an ease of being, is the way I would describe it. Each time you come out, there is like a post-retreat glow where everything seems pretty easy, and that feeling, and this is, I guess, a pretty common report, that feeling does diminish over time. And that's why people routinely schedule their retreat experiences. For me, I'm trying to do at least 2 a year,
Mm.
because every time I go back, it feels like you kind of get that boost. It becomes harder to remember what it's like to be in that state. So then you go back and sort of get another shot. It's like a booster shot for your vaccine,
Yeah.
because it is kind of a vaccine against suffering. Because if you can force yourself to just sit in a dark room for 8 days in a row and be okay with it, then that's
Yeah.
going to be a pretty good inoculation against whatever situation you might find yourself in your daily life.
Yeah.
And so you go back to get this sort of booster shot.
Yeah. I like it. The booster shot. No, I'm very interested in doing one at some point. So I'm always interested to hear what people's experiences are. So that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I highly recommend it.
So you kind of said this before, but playing music within itself is kind of like a meditative experience within itself. Kind of on a separate note, what is your creative process like?
For a lot of years when I was coming up, the creative process was, it was kind of random. I was playing guitar all the time, and sometimes I'd come up with stuff, and then I'd record it, hold it back, and then try to develop it into a song, for the band. As I've gotten older, I've had to formalize the creative process a little bit more, because you end up realizing that if you sit around and wait for inspiration the way that I did when I was younger, then sometimes it never comes. So what I try to do when I am writing for a record, if we have a record coming up, or if I'm trying to be creative, I just try to get into the studio at the same time every day and just show up and work whether I want to or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been important for me. And the times when I've been most productive, I've had a schedule like that, where I get up in the morning. I'll be more successful if I go straight to the studio and start being creative and don't look at my phone or my email or social media. Because the way I see it is, I have a certain amount of good consciousness that I can use during the day. And it's best for me now in the morning. That wasn't always the case. When I was younger, I was more of a night person. Now, around like 30, it switched. The morning is when my brain is firing the best.
Me too. Me too.
So I better be doing the most important thing first thing in the morning.
Yes.
So if I waste it on looking at Twitter and Instagram and then emailing and texting and doing all that stuff, then I don't get that back until the next morning. So if I really truly want to be creative, I got to get into the studio as soon as I can.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm exactly the same way. Do you think that, like, when you're meditating or doing something like your silent meditation, do you ever find like creative inspiration comes through in those moments of stillness?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can be a frustrating thing on retreat, because they encourage you not to be writing things down,
Oh,
or
really? Like you can't
yeah,
journal or anything?
some retreats would allow you to do that. Some traditions would allow you to do that. You certainly could, but I treat those times as I'm going inward, and I'm not gonna. I think it would be really easy to treat those sorts of activities as escapes that you might do out of boredom. And I
Yeah.
think it's the boredom that leads to the great insights for me. So there are things that come up on those retreats. So you'd be like, oh, I wish I had my guitar, or maybe I should record this idea. Maybe I should write this down, and I'll just sort of, I'll let those go, because I think one of the things that you observe when you are meditating, that there is an abundance of ideas and creativity that you can tap into whenever you want. Things will be there for you. But the practices themselves really benefit the creativity, especially the equanimity piece of it, because in the creative process, I think it's very easy to be so hard on yourself, and
Mm-hmm.
to be so hard on your ideas, and to get into a judgmental, critical sort of mindset. And when you're being creative, I think you need to just allow ideas to flow freely, and be non-critical, and just allow stuff to come up. And so I think those practices really help with that.
Have you heard of The Artist's Way?
Oh yeah, Julia Cameron.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I
good. And
love
all
that.
about the morning pages and like just getting the stuff out of you in the morning and having this flow of consciousness and not and silencing the editor, because I think we all have that piece of us that's the critic, and that can really hold us back from expressing ourselves creatively. And she believes that we're all creative in different, express it in different ways. But I feel like creativity is really such a vital part of our expression, and I think some people just say, "Oh, I'm just not a creative person," and are really missing that there are so many different expressions of that. And I find meditation to be such an amazing way to tap into my creativity. I find like that stillness and taking that time to be quiet, then afterwards, I always just feel like my brain is just more fertile with ideas. And I think that that's a really amazing benefit to meditation.
Absolutely. Yeah, Julia Cameron. Yeah, I read that book a long time ago because I read that Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins was really into that. So
Yeah,
okay, I'll check that out.
might as well. Yeah, it's a great book. You guys should check it out. And I forgot to ask you, what type of meditation do you do? What kind of meditation?
I got turned on to this teacher whose name is Shinzen Young, and I got turned on to him by a friend of mine that I happened to grow up with in Nebraska named David Creswell, and he's become one of the world's leading researchers in the actual scientific benefits of meditation. He's a professor at Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, wow.
So as I started getting into it, I knew that he was studying some of this stuff. So I asked him, I was like, okay, there's so many different types of meditation. What's the good stuff? Because I had at that point I had tried a bunch of different ones that were all great. And he said, check out Shinzen Young. And his approach is really it's a hybrid of kind of all the contemplative traditions that have been around in the history of the world.
Wow.
So he calls his system unified mindfulness, and it's really a blend of all these different types of meditative practices like Zen Buddhism, Vipassana. It's really probably mostly weighted towards Vipassana practice or mindfulness. That's like going within and paying attention to the sensations
Yep.
in the body. And that's where the sort of 10-day retreat template comes from, if I understand it. I'm certainly not an expert. So he's blended together all these traditions. So that's what I've been doing. And if you Google unified mindfulness, you can find they have a bunch of different great programs to teach their techniques.
Great.
He breaks it down in more of a less of a religious sort of way and more of a secular scientific way. That's why I think a
Right.
lot of scientists and engineers are attracted to his style of meditation, because he really is really precise in his language and in teaching the specific techniques and what you're going after. Because for a lot of those techniques, it's kind of mystical and you don't really understand what's going on. And it's for him, it's more prescriptive. Do this and look for this, which I liked because it's very clear what you're supposed to be doing.
You were raised Mormon, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does it inform you right now, like in your day to day?
Well, I think I'm really grateful for being raised religiously. I think it did teach me a lot early on, especially in terms of we had specific rituals that we did on Sunday that were inducing specific spiritual states, which I got to experience as a young child. Every Sunday, going to sacrament meeting, there was a real effort to foster an environment that promoted what they called the Holy Spirit. And so I got to experience that as a young child. And through meditation, I found another access point into that feeling of the Holy Spirit that isn't weighed down by the dogma of a traditional fundamentalist religion,
Yeah.
which I found very useful. It was very confusing for me growing up to feel those religious feelings, those spiritual feelings, but then at the same time have an intellectual problem with the origins of the religion or the actual teachings of the religions. Do this, don't do this, and if
Sure.
if you don't do this, you're gonna pay eternal damnation. I had a problem with that
Yeah.
intellectually, but I was still experiencing the benefits of the rituals of practice. So it was really great for me much later in my life to find meditation and to find out that, oh, I can access those feelings through a practice that's not weighed down by the dogma.
So, what are your beliefs now? Do you just believe in some higher power? Do you call it God? Do you believe that there's a larger force out there?
I believe that through the practice of meditation, you find that at the root of everything there's an experience of love. So if you want to call that God, you could call that God, but it's not God in the traditional sense.
So, when you meditate, you kind of imagine you're tapping into just this stillness or a deeper sense of yourself, maybe?
Sure, you could say that. Yeah, I feel that there's a potential to tap into a feeling that I can only describe as love that I do think connects all sentient beings and things. And there's a feeling of unity
Yeah.
that comes forth. And I don't know what any of that means. And I'm fine
I
with
mean, nobody does, right?
nobody does. And so that's a mystery as to whatever that unifying force is, but I feel like I've come into contact with that.
Okay. Perfect. Love. I'm into it.
Yeah.
I'm into it. So do you feel another kind of question like that? Why do you feel like we're here on the planet? Like, what's the purpose of it all?
I'm not sure, but there's this great book by this author named Robert Wright that's called Non-Zero. And he traces in biological and cultural evolution this process that's been happening since forever. In biology, we started off as these sort of single-celled organisms that started to split off into different parts. And as they became more complicated, they had to cooperate with each other, these parts, and they evolved, from an amoeba into monkeys and into ultimately humans. So you see this process where it starts simple and it becomes more complex and there's more cooperation. And so a zero sum game, it would be like tennis. I win, you lose. Um, but in non-zero sum games, people work together and they both win, and that's how life works. So in cultural evolution, you see the same thing. There were just wandering tribes of people, and then slowly over time, there's this arrow of progress where you go from bands of tribes into city states, into nations, and to what we have now, where we're in complete cooperation in a lot of ways with the entire world. As fragmented as the world seems now, if somebody gets sick in China, then we're sick too. We're all in this together. And so we
Mm.
have this mass sort of cooperation. So that upward arrow of progress and cooperation, I don't know what guides that, but maybe it's love, maybe it's that whatever that unifying force is that we're talking about. So maybe that has something to do with why we're here on the planet.
Ooh, I love that
Does that
answer.
make any sense?
Yeah,
Is
it
that
does.
too out there? It's a great
No, I
book,
love it.
uh, Non-Zero, where he
I'll put it in
tracks.
the show notes.
Yeah, he tracks that evolution, and you can also see that in the book *Sapiens*,
I've
which
heard of
which
that.
is which is great. He does a great, basically, history of the entire world, and
Mm.
you can see that progress.
Well, I think that's an awesome note to end on.
Cool.
Thank you so, so much for taking the time to chat and for sharing all your insights. This has been so fun.
Yeah, it's been great.